The sound of a single gunshot echoed across the valley, startling birds from their perches and sending them scattering into the twilight sky. That single crack of thunder would change everything for Eleanor Blackwood, though as she stood on her porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, she had no way of knowing her life was about to collide with a man more legend than flesh. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mountains of Timberpine County cast long shadows over Eleanor's homestead as dusk settled across the land. 3 years of solitude had taught her to read these mountains like a book, the way snow clung to north-facing slopes well into spring, how fog gathered in the valleys before a storm, and which ridgelines coyotes used when hunting at dawn. This evening, something felt different. The air carried a heaviness that had nothing to do with the coming night. Eleanor wiped her calloused hands on her apron and squinted at the horizon. The small cattle ranch that had once been her husband's pride now rested solely on her shoulders. 30 acres of stubborn hope surrounded by wilderness and whispers. In town, they called her the Widow Blackwood, though some used less charitable names. A woman alone on a ranch was considered either desperate or deranged. Eleanor was neither. She was simply surviving. The last of the daylight disappeared behind the mountains, leaving her surrounded by the symphony of early summer, crickets tuning their instruments, frogs calling from the creek, and somewhere far off, an owl announcing the night's arrival. That's when she heard it, a different sound, human and pained, a low groan carried on the evening breeze. Eleanor tensed, her hand instinctively reaching for the rifle that hung beside the door. Raiders weren't common this far from the main trails, but desperation made men unpredictable. The sound came again, weaker this time, not the approach of danger, but the plea of someone already broken by it. She grabbed a lantern, lit it with steady hands, and stepped off the porch. The yellow glow pushed back the darkness only a few feet ahead as she followed the sounds toward the old oak that marked the north corner of her property. The groaning had stopped, replaced by a heavy, labored breathing. As she raised the lantern, higher, its light revealed a crumpled form half hidden in the tall grass. A man lay on his side, one arm clutched around his torso, dark stains spreading across his shirt, blood still wet enough to catch the lamplight like black oil. "Who's there?" she called, keeping her distance, rifle ready. "I'm armed and not alone." The last part was a lie, but experience had taught Eleanor the value of caution. The man didn't respond with words, just turned his face toward the light. The movement pushed back his coat enough to reveal what hung from his vest, a 5-pointed star, silver and blood-smeared, a Marshal's badge. "Good Lord," Eleanor whispered, lowering her rifle slightly. The man couldn't be much older than 40, though pain had carved temporary decades into his face. His dark hair was streaked with gray at the temples, and a few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. What caught her attention most were his eyes, alert despite his condition, taking her measure even as blood seeped between his fingers. "Ma'am," he managed, voice like gravel. "Sorry to trespass." Eleanor hesitated. Helping a lawman would seem the natural choice to most, but this far out, the law was more complex than city folk realized. Marshals brought trouble. They pursued dangerous men who left vengeance in their wake. And out here, so far from town, there would be no one to help if that vengeance found her door. "You're shot," she stated plainly, still keeping her distance. A grimace that might have been a smile crossed his face. Astute. Observation. Eleanor frowned, dying and still making jokes. She looked back toward her cabin, then at the surrounding darkness. No other sounds disturbed the night. If the man had pursuers, they weren't close, or they were good, enough to move silently. "Can you walk?" she asked. He tried to push himself up and failed, collapsing back with a muffled groan. given time. Time was exactly what he didn't have. The spreading stain on his shirt told its own story. Eleanor made her decision, setting the lantern down and approaching cautiously. She kept the rifle tucked under one arm as she knelt beside him, close enough now to smell gunpowder and sweat. "I'm going to help you up," she said, "but I need to know, is someone following you?" The Marshal's eyes met hers, surprisingly clear despite his condition. "Not tonight. Lost them. 2 valleys over." He paused, each word costing effort. "By morning." Different story. Eleanor nodded, understanding the implication. She hooked, her free arm under his shoulder, feeling him tense at the contact. On 3, 1, 2, she pulled on 3, and he pushed upward with a strangled sound that wasn't quite a scream. Together, they managed to get him standing, though he leaned heavily against her. The walk back to the cabin was slow torture. Twice he stumbled, nearly taking them both down. By the time they reached the porch steps, his breathing had become shallow and rapid. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool evening air. Inside, Eleanor guided him to the wooden chair by the fireplace. He collapsed into it, eyes squeezed. Shut, as she quickly lit the lamps. In the better light, she could see the full extent of his condition. Blood had soaked through his shirt and vest, and his skin had taken on an alarming pallor. "I need to see the wound," she said, setting the gi, rifle aside and reaching for the buttons of his vest. He didn't protest, just watched her with that same measuring gaze as she worked his clothes open. The bullet had caught him in the side, just below the ribs. The entry wound was small, but angry, surrounded by bruised flesh. "Exit wound?" she asked. The Marshal shook his head slightly. "Still in there." Eleanor pressed her lips together. She was no doctor, but 3 years alone had taught her more than city women knew about treating injuries. She'd pulled buckshot from her own leg once after a hunting accident. A bullet was different, deeper and more dangerous, but the principle remained the same. "I need to clean and dress it, at minimum," she said. "Removing the bullet would be better." "You've done that before?" he asked, voice strained but still carrying a hint of dry humor. "On cattle," she admitted, "never on a person." That almost smile appeared again. First time for everything. Eleanor gathered what she needed. Clean cloths, her sharpest knife, heated in the fire, needle and thread, honey from her hives, and the whiskey she kept for medicinal purposes. She set a pot of water to boil on the stove. "This will hurt," she warned, pouring whiskey over her hands and the knife. The Marshal took the bottle when she offered it, drinking deeply. "What's your name?" he asked, handing it back. "Eleanor Blackwood." "Judah Kane," he replied, then braced himself against the chair. "Do what you must, Mrs. Blackwood." What followed tested them both. Eleanor worked with steady hands, cleaning away blood to better see the wound. The bullet hadn't gone deep, lodged against a rib, instead of tearing through vital organs. Small mercies. With tweezers heated in the fire, she extracted fragments of his shirt from the wound. Then, after taking a deep breath, went after the bullet itself. Marshal Kane remained conscious throughout, his knuckles white where he gripped the chair arms, jaw clenched to keep from crying out. When the misshapen lead finally came free, he exhaled a shuddering breath that might have contained a prayer. Eleanor cleaned the wound once more, packed it with honey, and stitched it closed with neat, small sutures. By the time she finished, binding it with clean bandages, his eyes had grown distant and unfocused. He'd reached his limit. "You need to rest," she said, helping him to the small second bedroom, untouched since her husband's passing. "My gear," he murmured as she eased him onto the bed. "By the tree." "I'll fetch it at first light," she promised. "No one travels these woods at night." He caught her wrist with surprising strength. "Saddlebags. Important." Eleanor gently removed his hand. "Rest, Marshal. Tomorrow will bring its own troubles. Sleep claimed him before she finished speaking. Eleanor returned to the main room and stoked the fire, then cleaned away the evidence of her impromptu surgery. As she worked, doubts circled like crows. She'd just saved a Marshal's life and possibly signed her own death warrant in doing so. Whatever had put a bullet in Judah Kane would likely come looking to finish the job. She checked her rifle and the shotgun that hung above the mantel, then loaded her husband's revolver and placed it within reach of her bed. After setting water to boil for coffee, she settled into the rocking chair by the window, prepared for a long night of watching the darkness. Sleep came in fits and starts, always interrupted by the smallest sounds. Shortly before dawn, Eleanor jolted awake, certain she'd heard something. She rubbed gritty eyes and peered out the window. The eastern sky had just begun to lighten, turning the world to shades of grey and blue. Nothing moved in the yard. Then she heard it again, not from outside, but from the second bedroom. The Marshal was awake and speaking. Eleanor approached, cautiously, hand on the revolver tucked in her apron pocket. Through the partially open door, she could see Kane attempting to sit up, his face twisted with pain and urgency. "How bad?" he asked when he noticed her. "The wound? It's clean, but deep. You need rest." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He shook his head. "Not me. The situation." He gestured toward the window. "They're coming. My men too, but the others first, likely." Eleanor moved to the window and scanned the valley below. In the growing light, she could make out the main trail that snaked through the pines. Nothing moved there yet. "Who shot you?" she asked, turning back to him. Kane managed to swing his legs over the side of the bed, grimacing with the effort. "Man named Silas Vane. He and his gang robbed the bank in Silver Creek 2 days ago. Killed the teller." His eyes hardened. "I've been hunting them since, and they turned the tables," Eleanor concluded. "Ambushed us at Serpent Pass," Kane confirmed. "My deputies and I split up, figured they'd follow me, give the others time to circle back." A shadow crossed his face. "Lost 2 good men in the initial shooting." Eleanor's stomach tightened. "And now they're coming here." "My posse will come too," he said, reaching for his gun belt that she'd draped over a nearby chair. 3 deputies, good men." He checked his revolver with practiced hands, despite the pain evident in his movements. "But Vane has 8 riders, mean ones. 8 against 4, and one of those 4 barely able to stand." The odds turned Eleanor cold. "I need to get my cattle into the north pasture," she said, practical concerns surfacing through her fear. "And bring in the horses." Kane nodded. "I'd help if I could." "Stay alive, that's help enough." Eleanor hesitated, then added, "Your saddlebags. What's in them that matters so much?" Something complicated passed across the Marshal's face. "Bank money, most of it anyway. Recovered it when we first caught up to them." He looked directly at her. $20,000. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. 20,000 was more money than most people would see in a lifetime. More than enough to kill for many times over. "I'll fetch your gear," she said after a moment. "You need to eat something if you're going to be any use today." Outside, the morning air carried the crisp scent of pine and looming rain. Eleanor moved quickly to the oak tree where she'd found Kane. His horse was gone, either stolen or run off after its rider fell. But the saddlebags remained, partially hidden in the tall grass. They were heavier than she expected. The weight of all that money pulling at her arms like sin itself. On her way back, Eleanor stopped at the barn. She released the cattle into the north pasture, where a natural depression would hide them from casual view, then brought her 2 horses into the barn. The bay gelding was steady, but the younger mare danced nervously, sensing Eleanor's tension. By the time she returned to the cabin, the sun had fully crested the mountains. Kane had managed to dress himself and sat at the kitchen table, pale but alert. He checked the saddlebags immediately, relief visible when he found the contents undisturbed. "Thank you," he said simply. Eleanor nodded and set about making a quick breakfast of cornbread and coffee. As she worked, she found herself studying the Marshal. Despite his injury, he carried himself with a contained power, economical in his movements. His eyes missed nothing, and his hands, though they occasionally trembled from pain, never strayed far from his weapon. "How long have you been a Marshal?" she asked, setting a plate before him. 12 years, he replied, eating sparingly but with appreciation. "Before that, army. Before that, trouble." A faint smile touched his lips. "Seems I've come full circle and brought the trouble to my door," Eleanor observed without rancor. Kane's expression sobered. "For that I am truly sorry, Mrs. Blackwood. When this is over, the government will compensate you for any damage, if they live to see compensation." Eleanor didn't voice the thought. "Your husband?" Kane asked after a moment. "I assume he's dead 3 years now," Eleanor supplied, her tone matter-of-fact. "Fever took him winter before last. You've managed alone since then?" Something in his voice made her look up sharply. Not pity, assessment. "I have," she said. "This place isn't much, but it's mine. Paid for in full." Kane nodded slowly. "It's good land. You've cared for it well." Before she could respond, a sound from outside froze them both, hoofbeats approaching fast. Kane was on his feet instantly, gun drawn despite the pain that flashed across his face. Eleanor reached for the shotgun. "Wait," Kane said, moving carefully to the window. He peered out, then relaxed slightly. "It's Samuel, one of my deputies." Eleanor followed him to the porch as a dust-covered rider pulled up to the hitching post. The newcomer was young, barely out of boyhood, with a shock of red hair and freckles that belied the determination in his eyes. He wore a deputy's badge and carried a Winchester rifle in a saddle scabbard. "Marshal!" Relief washed over the young man's face. "We thought—" He stopped, noticing Eleanor. "Ma'am," he acknowledged with a quick tip of his hat. "Report, deputy," Kane said, one hand pressed discreetly against his wounded side. "Vane and his men crossed Blackbriar Creek at dawn," Samuel said, dismounting. "They're following your trail, not more than an hour behind me. Jenkins and Cooper are flanking wide, coming in from the West Ridge. And the bank money?" "Safe," Kane confirmed. "Mrs. Blackwood has been kind enough to offer shelter." Samuel gave Eleanor an appraising look, respect dawning. "Much obliged, ma'am." Eleanor simply nodded. Kindness had little to do with her actions, practicality and basic decency, perhaps. Now that same practicality told her to prepare for what was coming. "If there's going to be shooting around my home, I should have a say in how it happens," she said firmly. "I know this land better than any of you." Kane studied her for a moment, then inclined his head. "What do you suggest?" Eleanor outlined the terrain, the approaches to the homestead, the natural blinds where men could hide, the sight lines from the house and barn. As she spoke, she saw the Marshal's estimation of her rise. The deputy looked between them, clearly surprised by his superior's deference to a woman's tactical opinion. "The creek bed gives cover all the way to within 30 yards of the barn," she concluded. "That's where I'd come from if I wanted to attack." "Then that's where we'll be waiting," Kane decided. He turned to Samuel. "Rifle on the roof. You can cover both approaches from there." The young deputy nodded and went to position himself. Kane turned back to Eleanor, his expression grave. "You should hide? The root cellar, perhaps?" Eleanor shook her head. "This is my home, Marshal Kane. I'll defend it alongside you." Something like admiration flickered in his eyes. "As you wish. But stay inside. Your shotgun will serve best if they breach the cabin. For the next half hour, they prepared. Eleanor filled buckets with water and placed them strategically in case of fire. She moved valuables and keepsakes to the root cellar, along with the saddlebags full of recovered money at Kane's insistence. The Marshal, moving stiffly but with growing strength, checked and loaded every weapon they had. By mid-morning, 2 more riders appeared from the western ridge, Jenkins and Cooper, the remaining deputies. Unlike young Samuel, these men were veterans, weathered by years under the badge. Cooper, tall and lean with a drooping moustache, took position in the barn loft. Jenkins, built like a blacksmith with hands to match, joined Kane in the cabin. They arrived just in time. Minutes later, a dust cloud appeared on the eastern trail. 8 riders, Samuel called down from his rooftop perch, moving slow, checking the surroundings. Kane stood at the window, his color better, but pain still evident in the tight lines around his mouth. Vane will have recognized my trail by now. He knows I'm here. And injured, Jenkins added grimly. Eleanor felt fear twist in her stomach, but pushed it aside. Fear was a luxury for safer times. She checked the shotgun once more, feeling the weight of it in her hands. Her husband had taught her to shoot before his passing, one of the few useful things he'd done before the fever took him. The riders stopped just beyond rifle range, gathering in a loose circle. One man separated from the group and rode forward slightly. Even at a distance, something about him radiated menace. "That's Vane," Kane said quietly. "Wounded wolf coming to finish what he started." The man cupped his hands around his mouth and called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "Marshal Kane! We know you're in there. Send out the money and the woman, and we might let you live." Kane's jaw tightened. He glanced at Eleanor, something protective flashing in his eyes. "Don't worry. He won't get either." The thought of being sent out, like a package, made anger flare through Eleanor's fear. This was her home, her land. She'd worked it alone for 3 years, fought for every inch of it. No outlaw would take it, or her, without a fight. Vane called again when no answer came. "You've got 5 minutes, lawman. Then we burn you out." The deputies looked to Kane. He studied the terrain through the window, eyes calculating distances and angles. "They'll split up," he predicted. "Try to surround us. Samuel has the high ground and Cooper the barn. Jenkins, take the west side of the cabin. I'll cover the east." "And me?" Eleanor asked. Kane met her gaze directly. "You're our last line. If they breach the cabin, it's your shotgun that'll greet them." The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat, feel sweat gathering at her temples despite the morning cool. Outside, Vane and his men had disappeared from view, scattering to take positions. "They're moving through the trees," Samuel called down softly. "3 heading for the creek bed, just like the lady said." Kane nodded grimly. "And so it begins." The first shot came without warning, a rifle crack that splintered the window. Frame inches from Kane's head. He ducked instinctively, then returned fire through the broken glass. From the barn loft, Cooper's rifle answered, followed by Samuel's from the roof. The battle erupted in earnest then. Bullets tore through the cabin walls, thudding into furniture and raining splinters. Eleanor crouched behind the heavy oak table she'd overturned for cover, shotgun ready. Through the chaos, she could hear Kane and Jenkins calling to each other, coordinating their defense. A scream from outside told her one of Vane's men had met Cooper's aim. Another shot from the roof, and Samuel shouted, "Got one! East side." 2 down, 6 to go. The odds were improving, but still dangerous. Then smoke began to seep through the cabin, not from inside, but from outside. Eleanor smelled it first, the acrid tang of burning wood and hay. "The barn!" You cried, rushing to the window. Sure enough, flames licked at the barn's eastern wall, where one of Vane's men must have thrown a torch. Cooper's rifle fell silent, and for a heart-stopping moment, Eleanor feared for the deputy. Then she saw him emerge from the barn door, firing as he ran for the cover of the water trough. He made it halfway before a shot caught him in the leg. He tumbled, rolling behind a woodpile as bullets kicked up dirt around him. "Cover him!" Kane ordered Jenkins, who laid down suppressing fire from his window. The Marshal turned to Eleanor, decision made in an instant. "I need to reach him. Keep firing at anything that moves near that creek bed." Before she could protest, Kane was out the back door, staying low as he circled toward the wounded deputy. Eleanor took his position at the window, heart in her throat as she watched him move with surprising speed despite his injury. A flash of movement caught her eye, one of Vane's men rising from behind a boulder, taking aim at Kane's back. Without hesitation, Eleanor fired. The shotgun's roar was deafening in the confined space. At this distance, the spread was wide, but effective enough. The outlaw dropped his rifle, clutching his shoulder as he fell back behind cover. Kane reached Cooper and helped him to his feet. Together, they staggered toward the cabin as Jenkins and Samuel provided covering fire. Eleanor met them at the back door, helping to pull the wounded deputy inside. "Much obliged, ma'am," Cooper gasped as she helped him to a chair. Blood soaked his trouser leg, but the wound wasn't immediately life-threatening. Kane caught Eleanor's eye, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. She'd saved his life, and he knew it. "The barn," she said, turning back to the window. The flames had caught properly now, spreading across the dry timber. "My horses," she whispered, a new fear clawing at her. As if in answer to her concern, the barn doors burst open. The bay gelding and the young mare galloped out, driven by smoke and fear. They raced across the yard toward the north pasture, miraculously avoiding the gunfire. Small mercies, Eleanor thought. The firefight intensified. Vane's remaining men, seeing their advantage in the chaos of the burning barn, pressed closer. Bullets shattered the remaining windows. One grazed Jenkins' arm, leaving a bloody furrow that he bound with a strip torn from his shirt. "We're pinned down," he growled, and running low on ammunition. Kane checked his revolver, 3 bullets left. Eleanor had fired 2 shotgun shells, leaving her with 4. Samuel's shots from the roof had become increasingly infrequent, suggesting his own dwindling supplies. "We need to end this," Kane said, voice low and determined. "Draw them in closer." Eleanor looked at him sharply. "That's suicide." "Not if we set the terms," he countered, eyes bright with tactical calculation. "Vane wants the money. Let's give him a chance at it." Understanding dawned. "A trap," Eleanor murmured. Kane nodded, quickly outlining his plan. It was dangerous, desperate, even, but it might work. As they prepared, a lull fell over the battlefield. Vane's voice called out once more. "Your barn's gone, Marshal. The house is next. Last chance to surrender what's ours." Kane caught Eleanor's eye, silent question in his gaze. She nodded once, steeling herself for what was to come. "We're out of ammunition, Vane," Kane shouted back, his voice convincingly weak. "The woman's hurt. Don't burn us out. We'll send the money." A pause, then, "Throw out your guns first." "Sending out the woman with them," Kane called. "She needs a doctor. The money's in a saddlebag behind her." Murmured consultation came from Vane's position, then, "Send her out slow. Any tricks and she dies first." Kane turned to Eleanor. "Ready?" She took a deep breath and nodded, clutching the empty shotgun in trembling hands, a performance that wasn't entirely feigned. Her other hand concealed Kane's backup revolver, fully loaded, beneath her apron. "Be careful," he said softly, something more than professional concern in his voice. Jenkins helped Cooper into position behind the overturned table. His rifle, their last loaded long gun, aimed at the door. Kane took position behind the kitchen counter, out of sight from the entrance, but with a clear firing line. Eleanor stepped out onto the porch, moving slowly, shoulders hunched in apparent defeat. The empty shotgun hung from her right hand, pointed downward. With her left, she dragged a saddlebag, not the one containing the money, but a decoy filled with scrap metal and canvas to give it weight. Vane emerged from behind a large pine, rifle trained on her. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 30, with cold eyes and a face that might have been handsome were it not twisted with greed and cruelty. 3 of his men flanked him, weapons ready. "That's far enough," he called when she reached the bottom of the porch steps. Eleanor stopped, letting the shotgun hang limply at her side. "Drop the gun," Vane ordered, approaching cautiously. She complied, letting it fall to the dirt. His eyes darted to the saddlebag, naked desire evident. "Kane's inside?" he asked, stopping 10 feet away. Eleanor nodded, allowing fear to show plainly on her face. "Shot bad, can barely stand." Vane smiled a predator's grin. "Good." He gestured to one of his men. "Check the bag." The outlaw approached Eleanor warily, rifle still trained on her as he reached for the saddlebag. The moment his hand touched it, Eleanor dropped to the ground. The signal. Glass shattered as Kane fired through the front window, the outlaw reaching, for the bag jerked backward, clutching his chest. From the roof, Samuel's rifle cracked one final time, dropping another of Vane's men. Jenkins' shot from inside the cabin narrowly missed Vane himself, who dove for cover behind the water trough. Eleanor rolled behind the porch steps, drawing the hidden revolver. Vane's remaining man fired wildly at the cabin, splintering wood, but hitting nothing vital. Eleanor steadied her aim and squeezed the trigger just as her husband had taught her. The outlaw stumbled, dropping his rifle as her bullet found his shoulder. Only Vane remained, pinned down and alone. "It's over, Vane!" Kane shouted from inside. "Throw out your weapon!" Silence answered him. Eleanor peered cautiously around the steps. The water trough where Vane had taken cover stood empty. Cold. Dread washed over her. He'd slipped away in the chaos. A board creaked behind her. Eleanor whirled, but too late. Vane loomed over her, having circled around the side of the house. His rifle was gone, but the revolver in his hand compensated for its absence. Hatred blazed in his eyes as he aimed directly at her heart. "You first," he snarled, "then Kane." Eleanor knew she couldn't raise her weapon in time. A strange calm settled over her in that final moment. Regret that she'd never see her land flourish as she'd dreamed. Acceptance that at least she'd die defending what was hers. The shot, when it came, was deafening. Eleanor flinched, expecting pain. Instead, she watched in astonishment as Vane's expression shifted from rage to confusion. His gun hand faltered, and he looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest. Then he crumpled to the dirt like a puppet with cut strings. Behind him stood Judah Kane, pale and sweating, revolver still raised. He'd come through the back door and around the house, anticipating Vane's move. Blood had soaked through his bandages, the wound reopened by his exertion, but his aim had remained true. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the magnitude of what had just happened washing over them. Then Kane lowered his weapon, offering his free hand to help Eleanor to her feet. "It's over," he said softly. Eleanor took his hand and rose, noticing how he swayed slightly. Without thinking, she stepped closer, supporting him as his strength finally began to fade. "You saved my life," she said. Kane's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. "We're even then." From the cabin, Jenkins appeared with Cooper leaning heavily on his shoulder. Samuel climbed down from the roof, rifle in hand. They surveyed the aftermath. 4 of Vane's men dead, 2 wounded and surrendering. 2 fled into the woods, where they would likely be caught within days. The barn still smoldered, but the rain that had threatened all morning finally began to fall, dousing the remaining flames. Eleanor looked at her homestead, damaged but standing. Like herself, the Marshal's posse had indeed defended her home, just as she had defended one of their own. In a world where a woman alone was considered, Vulnerable, she had proven otherwise, and in a man she should have feared, she had found unexpected alliance. As she helped Kane back toward the cabin, the rain washing blood and gunpowder from them both, Eleanor realized that something fundamental had shifted. The homestead was still hers, but somehow larger now, expanded by the circle of protection that had formed around it in a single tumultuous morning. Marshal Kane paused at the threshold, looking back at the land stretching out behind them. "You have a beautiful home, Mrs. Blackwood," he said quietly. "Worth defending." Eleanor nodded, feeling the weight of his words and the promise they might contain. "It is," she agreed, "and I'm not finished building it yet." His eyes met hers, and this time, the almost smile became real. "I look forward to seeing what it becomes." Eleanor could barely stand when the gunfire finally ceased. Her ears rang in the sudden silence. She stumbled toward the porch, where Marshal Kane leaned heavily against the railing, fresh blood seeping through his bandages. Their eyes met across the yard. No words needed. They had survived. Jenkins and Cooper secured the remaining outlaws, while Samuel tallied the damage. The barn smoldered, half consumed by flames. 2 of Vane's men lay dead, 3 wounded, 3 fled into the wilderness. The homestead stood damaged, but intact. 3 days passed in a blur of activity. The deputies departed with their prisoners, traveling slowly to accommodate Cooper's injury. Eleanor rebuilt what was destroyed, Marshal Kane working alongside her, despite his wound. Their hands often met while passing tools, lingering longer each time. On the 7th evening, Eleanor found Judah sitting on her porch steps, badge gleaming in the sunset. "My report's filed," he said quietly. "Justice served." "What happens now?" she asked, settling beside him. He turned, eyes reflecting golden light. "That depends on you, Eleanor." She covered his hand with hers. "I've been thinking about taking on a partner for this ranch." His smile, the first real one she'd seen, told her everything she needed to know. 2 months later, when the town gossips saw the marshal's horse permanently tethered at the Blackwood ranch, they finally understood what Eleanor had known that fateful night. Sometimes salvation comes wearing a badge, and sometimes protection means building something new together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.